Hello everyone and welcome to the next how-to. You have landed in a session that we have with Emma Segal, and I'll come on to that and give you some more context on that in just a second. So much of design for planet comes down to some basic understandings about carbon literacy. Stuff that we're taught or maybe not taught at school and we've perhaps forgotten. So luckily we have Emma Segal from Swivel Skills to lead us through how to make your business more carbon literate. Emma brings over 2 decades of experience designing and producing internationally manufactured consumer goods around the world for multinational organizations, as well as designing for change-making projects to support the growth of the circular economy at all levels. Emma has won many design and illustration awards, and her work has been seen in high-end retailers, movies, TV shows, magazines, books on system change, and featured in the Smithsonian. What an amazing CV you have, Emma, and over to you to do this session on carbon literacy.
Great. Thank you so much for that introduction. So yeah, as mentioned, my name is Emma. I work with Swivel Skills, and I also work with another company that you might have heard of before, which is the Unschool of Disruptive Design. And this company is owned by Leila Ajarlu, who founded it. And together we kind of built this platform called Swivel Skills, which is to address the professional skills gap for designers around sustainability. And so, as Alicia mentioned, I am a designer by trade. I spent 20 years making apparel and hard goods, traveling around the world and working directly in factories themselves. And so that was really when I started, I had the opportunity and the luck to be in an era where designers did actually get sent to factories. And it was through that experience that I saw the direct impacts of what my actions as a designer had on both ecosystems and the social aspects of the places where we were getting things made. And so some of you may have experienced this, but I had a very existential crisis, you could say, about realizing the impacts of my very beautiful design process of imagining something that's going to provide a service or provide a useful, beautiful object or other function to the world, but knowing then, putting the pieces together, that it was harming other people or the ecosystems that we ourselves depend on. And so for me, I actually quit design for about 2 years. I couldn't deal with it. I'm like, I don't really know how to function within this gap of my personal values, my professional values. I had tried really hard to close that gap. In my work, I had put in a lot of initiatives around recycled paper. I had tried biodegradable plastic bags, all these kinds of things that I started to quickly realize needed actual technical skills to do effectively, because the impacts of the initiatives I was trying to implement ended up having unintended side effects. And so for me, I really understood that I had a gap in my knowledge. And after my kind of break from the design industry, I realized I had a lot of experience that I wanted to use and find a way to galvanize that towards being a designer, but in a completely different way. And so I wanted to close my gap. I went back to school. I got a master's in sustainable design, and now I'm doing my PhD in design policy. So this gap in your professional experience as a designer is something that for the past, 10 years, or sorry, 7 or 8 years that I've been working with Disrupt and Unschool and now Swivel, we try to close this. And with the Unschool, it's around systems thinking, design skills for sustainability and sustainability sciences. And now with this new platform, Swivel, we're really addressing the corporate side of this. So whereas Unschool had a lot of very passionate designers coming, or people from other industries as well, coming to learn about how they can use design to make systems change, this is really targeted towards people that are kind of in my position, right? And where you might be now, where you're working in a company. We all know the urgency of this climate crisis. We all know we need to decarbonize. But how do we do it? Like, what is the steps that we need to take, especially when as designers, it's not really taught. Like even now in this day and age, like the past 5 years, we've seen huge movement in the in what's happening in the willingness of companies to move forward, but we're still missing some of that education around it, and education that's very actionable. So a lot of us are very aware of these things. We know we need to do it, but what is the how? Like, how do we do it? And so that's the thing that we're trying to close with this, is like understanding what are these policies that are coming up. You know, if you've been paying attention to the EU regulations that are coming into effect next year, some of them are a little bit vague. There's a lot of ISO talk going around. There's a lot of ESG stuff talk. There's a lot of greenhouse gas protocol information. But how do we incorporate that into, like, I don't know about you, but when I was a designer, I was always overworked. And I think that's very classic of many industries, even if you're not directly in the design industry. How do we incorporate all this information into our own practice? And then how do we do it in a way that has meaningful impact, right? As designers, we have the very big opportunity of having positive impact. About 80% of the impact of a product is decided at the design stage, which means you have a lot of power and influence, even though it may seem there are a lot of barriers to that. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But just on a broader scale, like, so the things that we touch on when we put a product out into the world is kind of the bigger environmental system, so the ecosystem. And, you know, this isn't really about loving nature, et cetera. That's a really nice aspect of it. But we rely on the ecosystems to survive as humans, right? Like, we need to breathe, we need to drink clean water, we need to plant food to eat. And the manufacturing industry, when we make products, affects all of those. About 7 million people die of air pollution every year, which is about the same amount that died from COVID in the pandemic. And that's every year this happens. And so 50% of the oxygen that we breathe, for example, comes from the ocean. So if the ocean is polluted and if it's not working effectively, that impacts our ability to breathe air. And I'm sure everybody here can agree that we need to breathe to live, right? So this is about making sure that we have an environment that we can survive and hopefully thrive in, not just for future generations, but also for right now. Like, some of these impacts have been in effect in communities around the world for decades already. Like, if you've ever had the opportunity to work in Southeast Asia, or if you live there, you know very well, like, the air can be quite toxic, and that is directly linked to the manufacturing industry. If you are from North America, Europe, we deflect and offload all of those impacts, the negative impacts, into the manufacturing countries in the global south. So that's part of the aspect of why we want to do this. There's also the economic side. This is the infrastructure side. So what are all of the materials we produce? We take things out of the ground, and I like to talk about it as things from above the ground. So like cotton, leather from cows, trees, paper, etc. And then there's all the things that come from underneath the ground. So minerals, metals, rocks, granite, all of this other stuff. But essentially every single thing that we touch in the world comes from the planet, right? And so how can we most maximize the efficiency of the things that we've already mined and taken from that ecosystem, instead of trying to draw new natural resources? And then the social side, these are all the things that impact us. Design influences us every day. Like, I was in an airport yesterday, I was coming from the Nordic Climate Summit, and just reflecting on the way that experience design even directs us through an emotional journey. When you're in an airport, they want you to have a very like controlled mindset. You want to make fuss, you're trying to go through security, and that experience is designed, right? And then everything physical that we touch, of course, is designed. Otherwise we'd be sitting naked in a forest, which, you know, might be fun, but we do need to get around and use things. So how do we go from this like very take, make, waste extractionary system into something that's more regenerative? And because this session is a little bit more around carbon specifically, and it can be, you know, sustainability can get a little bit focused on carbon and climate. There is also lots of other aspects of sustainability, but I did want to like just touch on carbon specifically for the session as it's the focus. But as a designer, when you're thinking about like, how can I impact climate? Like, how can I as one person impact, or even as a small company or as a small team, how am I going to have an impact on decarbonizing? And one of the things that we suggest and direct people to is being able to measure things. So you can't change things that you can't measure. That's a really time-honored management thing. And one of the most impactful things that you can do around carbon is measuring your scopes. So there's a greenhouse gas emission protocol that delineates these three kind of general buckets, these scopes. The first one is very direct. So if you have a company, agency, whatever it is, it's things that you own. You might own the building, you might own some cars, vehicles for staff. There might be computers, chairs, etc. Stuff that emits greenhouse gases. So not the chairs, but the cars. Scope 2 is indirect, so third party, maybe you lease things, you rent, there's other vehicles that you use, that you commission. And then the scope 3 is one that I find very fascinating because I've interacted a lot with it, which is the raw materials and then also suppliers. So people you're not directly engaging with, but of course are embedded into your processes. And you don't always see what this is. This is a little bit more opaque and a little bit harder to address, but is one of the ones that needs a lot of attention and trying to ask questions and dig deeper to find out what are all of the things that are happening in the scope that are indirect because you requested them or commissioned them. So, in the program, we have a lot of things that help you work through this. We have templates, worksheets, they're all downloadable, and you can start to make rough kind of back of the envelope calculations, and then advancing to another step where you would want to hire perhaps a professional. So if you were doing something around what is the full impact of a product that I'm making, you would want to sketch out, for example, the life cycle of it. And you would go around each step and try to figure out what is the carbon emissions at the shipping stage, at the packaging stage. Like, what if I change the packaging to this versus this? Or what if I make it in this country versus that country? What if I make like 7 buttons instead of 3, or make this out of ceramic or glass, etc. So some of these things you can kind of sketch out in life cycle thinking, which is something that we teach. And then the next stage would be to hire a professional to do a life cycle analysis and really get into that. And so within the program, we have a lot of resources for who are the professionals that you can hire for some of this more high level assessment, but also walk you through how you can do it yourself at your desk, like tomorrow, to get a general idea of it. And the more that you kind of like educate yourself in this, the more opportunities are going to grow. Like, we have a partnership with LinkedIn. We have courses on LinkedIn Learning, but also Layla, who founded Disrupt and Unschool and Swivel, is a LinkedIn Changemaker of the Year. And so we have a really nice relationship with them. And, we hear a lot from them about the opportunities in jobs. There's all these new titles that are cropping up. Like, just in the past few years, I've seen titles. I talk to companies all the time. We've worked with the UN, with like Heineken, all these big companies. And, the head of sustainability, director of sustainable initiatives, all these new titles are cropping up. And it's growing so quickly that the opportunity for this is huge, not just for companies to be able to capitalize on this, but for us as designers to build a new type of career to address the challenges that are current now, but also all the opportunities that, or all the regulations and policies that are going to be coming down the line. And essentially, like, this is a broad field. There's a lot of opportunity. So, your curiosity or interest may go in different ways, but in general, ESG, and environmental, social, and governance, you could focus on things around pollution and waste. You could go around, what is the social aspect, worker health and safety, gender diversity, of course, has been in the conversation for the past few years, especially. What is the liability of your products? What is the ethics? I teach a lot of workshops to young designers, especially. And what I try to share with them is having a core set of values in your personal life, how to translate that into your professional life. And so what I get them to do a lot, and this might be a good activity for you, is to reflect on what's important to you. There's a lot of options in the ESG field. Figure out what's the most key thing for you, and then building your own code of conduct. So if you sketch out what are the key points, and then kind of a 1-sentence code of conduct about where you stand on that. I say to the students a lot, like, how do you know if you've crossed a line if you don't know where that line is? So for you, what is that line? And then also, how feasible is it? What are the skills that you need to address those? And what is the gap that you need to fill? And all of this is to say, like, what we're working towards is a circular economy. So if you're in Europe right now listening in, this is probably something that you've heard about in the air. It's a little bit less talked about in North America. But the general idea is that you have this idea of a product, and then you send it away to get made. And what we're trying to do is, have a circular kind of model around that, so that all of the resources that are taken from nature get circulated over and over again. So hopefully you're drawing from materials that are already in the ecosystem, in the industrial system, and then having them somehow recaptured or reused, remanufactured in a way so that they're not ending up in a landfill. And also we're trying to draw as few natural resources out of the virgin kind of sphere as possible. As a designer, I really think that you have to think about, like, should I make this in the first place? There's 6 billion pairs of jeans every year that are made. Like, we really don't need to make more jeans. There's 8 point something billion people on the planet. So essentially we're making almost a new pair of jeans for every person every year, which is too much, right? So it's really thinking about, like, how can I be efficient with the resources that are already in the system? So eliminating that waste, we talked about the pollution, trying to get those materials to circulate as many times as possible through the economy. Extending life is a really interesting one. You can really increase the value of a material. If you're in a company that makes a tangible product, if you can take it back and resell it again, now you've made twice the money on the same thing. Of course, it's going to balance out a little bit here and there, shipping and so on, but there's lots of models of this right now. And essentially what we want to do is reestablish the value of the things that we take from the ecosystem, right? Because right now the value of a lot of things is low. They're very disposable. They don't cost us a lot because we rely on modern slavery and extortionary practices to make cheap goods. By and large, of course, there's very nice, beautiful aspects, but the majority of products out in the world come from very extractive processes, both humans and natural. So how do we increase the value of the materials that we do take and make sure they get recycled through those systems? And then going one step further, how do we have a positive impact? So not just reducing the negative, but is there a way that we can restore and regenerate natural systems through the products and services that we offer? And that's really the path forward, so that we have a pathway to building a system that's better than the one that we have right now, not just maintaining what we have. So, a lot of these concepts are in some ways intuitive, but the actual way to put them into practice in business and industrial context is what we kind of look at in the system. And like I mentioned, we have all these downloadable worksheets and templates to help you go through that. And there's a guidebook as well. And then really thinking about, like, at each stage, first of all, like I said, do we need to make this? How do we reuse it? Can we repair and share it? Can we recapture it, upcycle it? And then if we really do have to get to the point where we can't use it again or find a way to bring value back to it, how do we safely put it somewhere that it doesn't end up negatively impact the systems that are around us? So I want you to think for a second, like, just reflect about what are the barriers that you might have come across. Like, you heard some of mine. I didn't really know what I was doing. I didn't have the sustainability skills at the time. I wasn't sure what information on the internet was reliable. I wasn't sure what the most efficient path forward was, but there's lots of other things. So, there can be management pushback, budgetary pushback. I hear all the time, not just very much a very innocent level of not knowing what the right thing to do is. So take a minute and think, like, what are the things that are kind of stopping me in my job, or where is the resistance that you've had? And you're always going to have it. I think, like, even with the most forward-thinking companies, there's always going to be steps along the way where there is resistance. And one of the things that you can do is to start listing what those are so that you can begin to address them. It's really hard to address them if you're not really clear on, like, why people are doing what they're doing. And some of that goes around to, like, how you're presenting the information, especially in sustainability. It can be very confronting to understand the impacts of your actions as a company or as an individual. What is the fear, like, often around change? I've talked to a lot of companies who say that by admitting or saying that they're going to take on a new green initiative means that the old way that they were doing it was bad, right? And so that opens them up to criticism. It opens them up to, people asking questions that might not be so comfortable. But if you have a lot of transparency around it, if you tell people that you're taking them along for the ride with them, then that can really help reduce that. But it's a very important aspect to understand that people are afraid of change. And we're talking about jobs in one way, right? Like, is this going to impact my job, my ability to have future career? And then how do we flip that into what the opportunity is? And then there's just fatigue. Like, there's a lot going on in the world right now. Ever since the COVID pandemic, there's just been a general fatigue. I mean, even before that, if you were engaged in sustainability, it can be very depleting. And now we have, multiple wars around the world. We have a climate crisis. So this is a very real factor that people just get overwhelmed and tired. And so one of the things that we try to do is really try to make these things as accessible and quick and frictionless as possible, so that people who are, like overloaded with work, struggling with things that might be personal, families, other things that are happening around the world, we want to make this so that it is something that you can tangibly take on without adding to that overwhelm. And so this is just a quick snapshot. I don't want to get too far into these policies, but we do have them in the program. Some of the really exciting ones for designers is the Sustainable Products Initiative. So that's going to be a really interesting one that it's in effect, or it was adopted this year. So some more details about it will be coming up. But that's something that you could really dive into to see, what's the framework for this. There's some other things like ISO standards and so on that are international standards around how do you build products. Also, there is an ISO for social impact, which isn't a certification ISO, but it does give you really kind of like good starting points for how to address the social impacts of the products that you have. But the sustainable, I'm going to just go by these ones. The products is about having a digital passport for each of your products, which means that you can really trace back where it was and where it's going. And one of the things that we really want to prevent is the destruction of unsold goods, which is a huge problem, and having different requirements for procurement. So where are we getting the things that we're putting into these? So this is a huge opportunity. And just how you reflected on the barriers, I think another very important aspect of this is to reflect on what are the levers that I can use to shift things in the organization that I'm in. Like, what is the agency that you have? Maybe you're a junior designer, maybe you're a head of design. You have different spheres of influence in that. But what are the ways that you can kind of shift the conversation either within your own team or within your own organization, or even if you're a freelance designer? What is it that is going to shift your customers and your management around? Is it the compliance factor? Is it that, you want to be competitive with other people who are a little bit further ahead in this? Do you want to leave some kind of legacy? Do you want to be leaders in your field? Is it risk? Like, we're going to have to start quantifying risk with some of these new policies and putting like a dollar value to it. So if you rely on cotton, for example, and you are growing it in a water depleted zone, that is a risk. If there's no water to grow the cotton, that impacts your supply chain. So these are risks that are going to have to be reported on very shortly. And so what are these opportunities where you can shift the conversation? So it's not so much like, oh, we have to be more sustainable, but like, this is something that's going to build us into a better company, but also it's going to potentially reduce costs. It could increase market share for us. We could attract more value aligned talent. We could retain the people who are working for us who have a desire to work for a value aligned company, are very motivated. And so one of the things that we're kind of encouraging with this program is that it's basic training, like the same way that you have diversity training or safety training in a lot of companies. We want this to be foundational for everybody, design teams, marketing teams, the cleaning staff, like everybody along the way. So we're speaking the same language. We have the same terminology. We understand the reasons why we want to put this into the DNA of the company. And so the program is put into 3 parts. There's sustainability sciences, climate literacy, which we kind of just did a quick overview of, and then the circular economy. And that includes a lot of approaches and methods, tactics to do that. You can learn on your own time. We give you 12 months because everybody's busy. But really, if you wanted to do it, they're in 15-minute modules. You could do it at lunch. You could do it like, I don't know, 15 minutes a month for a year. You could binge it in 1 week. If you're somebody in HR and you want to track this, we have certifications, all that stuff that those, manager level people want. And we have tons of links. Everything is scientifically validated with links back to the sources. It's very clear and easy. I'm an illustrator, so I tried to make it, as beautiful and interactive as possible. You can move things around. There's little quizzes. So you can see here, there's step-by-step processes. There's group discussions, opportunities to reflect and reframe, checklists. And then we also have some additional components that you can add on. So very specific sustainable design strategies. So for the design crowd, Maybe the marketing team doesn't need that, but these are add-ons that you can include, which might be really useful. So that's kind of what the program is. And then, like I had mentioned, there is a guidebook. We made this 8.5 by 11, so you can open it up. You can order a paper copy and put it next to your desk, and that is your plan. Like, we have ways that you can build a plan of action through that, which is a really important part. But this guidebook was really made so that you could flip through it step by step. And by the end, you're going to have a really solid idea of where you're at and where you need to go and how to get there. So I hope that's helpful. And I am also looking forward to any questions that you guys might have. And thanks a lot for joining.
Thank you so much, Emma. That was fascinating. It was so much information like condensed into this presentation. So thank you very, very much for that. We have gone over a tiny bit on time, but that's okay. So I'm going to just go straight to the questions to engage with the audience, because I've seen that we have some in the Q&A. So we've got a question from Rowena saying, the suggestions you offered are paid for. You've mentioned next steps would be to hire a professional or to suggest pay for your training. Acknowledging everything you've said about the need for sustainability skills, what do you think about the availability of free tools to address the unknowns?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're in a position where you're a freelance independent designer, maybe you don't have the budget or resources, go to the Unschool. We have tons of free resources there. We're very, very committed to equitable access because, you know, a lot of sustainability information out there is, for one thing, in English only. And it's digital, so that's already a restriction. A lot of the world is not on the internet on a regular basis, about 40% of the world, give or take. And so we have built a lot of free resources and also really low cost ones, some pay as what you can, because just for like various boring software reasons, we have to offer our things in USD, and currency conversion can be an issue. So absolutely, there are lots of free tools that we've put together to kind of consolidate and refine what you're going. There's a lot of misinformation on the internet, right? So that's why we've tried to build these tools. And even a very useful one is the circular redesign kit. It's on the Unschool website. It's free. Just download it. That will like get you really on your way. And then for Swivel Skills, we tried to price it at a range that is very accessible for companies. You can buy it just as an individual, but we really don't want cost to be a factor because it is so often a barrier, right? And so for us, our whole corporate model is to go out of business. Like, we would just like to be redundant and not needed. So yeah, absolutely. I hope that helps.
Yeah, that was amazing. Thank you very much, Emma, for that incredible session. And yeah, if there's a couple other questions in the chat, but we are at time now. So maybe if you have further ones, you could reach out to Emma directly in the theme of collaboration.
Yes,
So
you can find me on the Swivel Skills website or the Unschool website. Just email me if you have any questions. I'm happy to answer, of course.
Brilliant. And so how do people get involved with Swivel Skills then? What would be their next step? Would they email you?
Yeah, email me, or there's a website, swivelskills.com, or the training platform is training.swivelskills.com. So just go directly to either of those. You can Google us, or the Instagram is Swivel Skills on Instagram. LinkedIn is a great place. We're always on LinkedIn because that's where the professional platform, and we try to divest from social media. So find me there, Emma@disruptdesign.co, or hello@swivelskills.com. Those are all many ways to find me on the internet. And then I'm happy to have a conversation. If you want to have a call, we could do a walkthrough, or if you just need a little bit of like support, you know, let me know and then we'll have a chat.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Emma. And thank you to our online audience. See you in our one of our final how-tos coming up next in this stream.